Hey, what's up with it, guys? Hey, welcome back to another video. This is going to be my 3 biggest PVE tips and tricks. I get the question a lot, kind of, from newer players or people just coming over to Balance Druid and switching from Resto and wanting to know what are some big things that they can do to really help improve their initial, success as a Balance Druid, I guess, or how they can kind of eke out the most DPS possible. So this is going to be my 3 biggest tips for you guys. I do go over these a lot in stream and kind of go through and explain them or showcase them when we're doing different content, but I haven't actually made a dedicated video to this. So that's what this is. First tip, we're going to go into the opener. Now, the opener is going to be contingent on you having a debuff slot for Moonfire or not, but it's basically going to be Wrath into Moonfire into Starfire. Now, the sequence that we're doing these spells is actually really significant. You want to cast Wrath first because it has a chance to crit. Moonfire second also has a chance to crit, but is not going to consume Nature's Grace if Wrath does crit. Then Starfire third because that is the spell that we want to be utilizing our Nature's Grace procs on. So, in short, you are trying to bait out a Nature's Grace proc in your opener, and this gives you basically 2 chances to do so. Now, if you really want to push this to the next level, you can make a macro that will use an on-use trinket, something like Toep that we have here, or Zandalari Hero Charm. Any of these on-use trinkets are amazing for Balance Druids, and they're amazing because so much of the farm content right now is shorter fights, so you actually get a ton of value out of these on-use trinkets. I have this macroed with a Starfire, like /cast Starfire. So if you watch any of my stuff, you'll see that it happens instantaneously, and it's because those are macroed together. It is important to keep in mind that trinket use will actually happen immediately regardless of global cooldown. The Starfire cast will not happen until your global cooldown is ready for your next spell. So it's important, I'll showcase this right now, but it's important you're going to cast Wrath, then you're going to cast Moonfire, and you want to wait basically 1.5 seconds for that global before you hit this macro, because you don't want to start your Toep and put it on use 1.5 seconds before you can actually cast your Starfire. Hopefully that makes sense. But if you want to see here, my little global cooldown will actually show up really small here on the left-hand side of my screen. But we'll use it here, and we kind of wait. And you see then we basically get Toep and Starfire up at the same time, obviously allowing for massive burst and hopefully getting a Nature's Grace proc in that opener, even giving us even more. My mouse is bugging out. Sorry guys, I'm trying to turn around and it's like glitching out. So that's really the biggest opener that you can use. Now in a raid environment, say you're doing 40-man raiding and you're not allowed the debuff slot for Moonfire, it's okay. Just use Wrath in the opener. Wrath is actually a really good opener for a couple reasons. One, like we already went over, the Nature's Grace proc. The other being is that it's a quick cast with a travel time. So this is going to help ensure that you don't pull threat. It's going to let you start DPSing, but not actually DPSing on the target due to the travel time of the projectile. And it's going to ensure or help ensure that you don't pull aggro. One thing that is really bad is opening up with a Starfire, pre-casting it basically. It crits right off the bat, you rip aggro, and then the tank's positioning is all messed up. That's something you want to avoid at all costs. And if you're playing on Horde side like us, you don't have Blessing of Salvation, I think is what it's called. It's like the threat reduction. So you want to try and make sure you're very cognizant of threat at all times, even in 5-man groups, things like that. So Wrath is an opener no matter what, is still very good because, like I'm saying, the projectile travel time is going to help ensure that you actually don't pull threat, while also allowing you to potentially bait out a Nature's Grace proc in the opener, which overall is actually going to yield you more DPS than if you were just to cast Starfires normally. Hopefully that makes sense. Like always, guys, ask questions on the tips if you do have any down below. I do my best to answer and get to every single comment and question that I can. Second tip is in the same vein as what we just talked about at the end as far as optimizing our burst, is good trinket usage. Now this is a big one, and it took me a while to kind of figure out and just kind of innately know, depending on how many seconds I have left on my trinket, what I want to be using in what situations, because it's not always the same. In a perfect world, you're going to get as many Starfires off as possible with the trinket usage, because Starfire scaling is our highest, and that's really our go-to bread and butter spell when it comes to PvE content, and even PvP for that matter when it comes to burst. But there are times when you're going to have 2 seconds or 1 second left on your trinket, and you want to make sure you're using the right spells to really squeeze out the actual value of that trinket as much as possible. So if you see here, I'll start with my Toep into Starfire. Now, if everything goes to plan, we just one-shot these mobs when that happens. If everything goes to plan, you basically have 5 Starfire casts that you can fit in one Toep. But as we start getting to the end here, like right there, the Toep ran out right before my Starfire went off, which means my Starfire didn't actually use the Toep spell power bonus because the trinket ended too soon. So in that situation, you want to do one of 2 things. If you have an excess of 2 seconds, you can squeeze a Wrath cast in. Arguably, Moonfire is going to be a better choice most of the time because it does have an increased chance to crit. And usually if you're in a raid environment, you're going to have Curse of Shadows on the target, which means your Moonfire is going to be gaining basically an additional 10% bonus. So generally, you want to use your Moonfire if you can. However, there's going to be a good amount of times where you're not allowed the debuff slot, like I mentioned earlier. And if that's the case, you want to try and use Wrath if you can to kind of squeeze out that last second of the trinket if you are not able to fit in a Starfire. In a perfect world, you're going to keep casting Starfire, and your trinket is going to end a millisecond after your last Starfire cast goes off, and that's going to be ideal. The reality is that doesn't happen a lot of times, or you could get really lucky with crits, and because of basically, consecutively reducing your cast time on Starfire by ½ second, you get to where you have a weird 1 second window at the very end of your trinket usage, and you want to make sure you're cognizant of that and actually utilizing that last second of that bonus spell power to really increase your DPS as much as possible. Now, the way that I do this is I actually have a weak aura set up. This is actually super simple to set up. There's tons of videos on this, or if you have questions on this, by all means ask. But setting up a weak aura for things like Nature's Grace and your trinket, I would say are somewhat necessary when it comes to playing a balanced druid. They are much more significant when it comes to PvP because it allows you to really plan out your quicker casts because of these procs in situations where it's more life or death. But in PvE, it's still very important because you want to know how fast your next cast is going to be on a given spell depending on the percentage health of the target that you're trying to kill. So with that being said, using your trinket well, potentially squeezing in a Wrath or a Moonfire at the end of your trinket usage. Ideally, you don't want to do this at the beginning. You want to try and squeeze as many Starfires in as possible. I used to try and Moonfire at the opener, which is very good. But a lot of times you end up with this weird gap, and it makes you have to get really lucky and have no latency, and it's like a whole thing. So take my word for it. Start with a Toep usage or a Zandalari Hero Charm, spam that Starfire, and then use whatever you have as your little leeway leftover of that trinket usage with one of the other casts if you cannot fit in a full Starfire. One other thing that's important to mention, some of you guys might know this, some of you guys might not. There's a mechanic in the game that's called Snapshotting, that's what it's referred to, which basically means you're going to do a damage over time or heal over time component with an on-use trinket, and the damage over time component is basically going to hold the spell power on that spell as if you have that bonus spell power for the entirety of the damage over time component. This does work with Moonfire. What this means is if I pop Zandalari Hero Charm, I have a bonus 175 spell power. I cast a Moonfire at the very end of that trinket on being on use. Once the trinket fades away, my Moonfire is still going to tick as if I have a bonus 175 spell power. This is another reason why it's really strong to use your instant cast dots at the end of trinkets because of this mechanic. Again, you might not be able to use this in a 40-man raid environment, but it should be no issue when it comes to 5-mans or 20-mans, and it's no problem obviously when it comes to PvP. So hopefully that helps on tip number 2. Now, last thing before I get hoarse and completely lose my voice is tip number 3, and that's going to come to multi-dotting targets or just any kind of multi-target situation. Now, I do this a lot, mostly in Molten Core is the scenario I can think of it the most. I do this sometimes in the newer raids as well, but it is more mana intensive as we're using Moonfire a lot. This is a situation generally going to be 3 or 4 targets. You can also do this with 2 targets, but instance that comes to mind is like the 4 mob packs that are right after Gar and Molten Core. I don't know, like right before Gehennis or Baron or whatever it is right there. Like anytime there's a 3 or 4 mob pack, this is really easy to do. And basically what you're going to be doing is you're utilizing your Moonfire, and you're basically reacting in that 1.5 second global cooldown. If you get a crit on that initial burst of the Moonfire, your next cast is going to be a Starfire. If you don't get a crit, your next cast is going to be a Tab Moonfire on the next target. This is a good way to get a lot of damage out, spread out across, the multiple mobs, while also making sure you're utilizing the Nature's Grace proc on Starfire, because that's really what we need to do to increase our DPS. So for example here, I'm going to open up with a Starfire, and then we're going to go Moonfire. It didn't crit, so we're going to go Moonfire. Okay, then that crit. So we have a 1.5 second global to figure out if we're going to be able to cast that or not. Now we have 3 Moonfires up on 3 different targets, and we basically utilized that crit for a Starfire on the second Moonfire crit that we had there. If I didn't get that crit right, you kind of just keep going, and then as soon as you get a crit, your next cast is a Starfire. Follow that up. If you're casting it on the same target, they already have Moonfire. While that Starfire is casting, you tab over to the next target that doesn't have Moonfire, and you hit Starfire on one target, Moonfire on the other target, allowing you to spread dots simultaneously, and using that crit every time you get it on a Starfire spell, and increasing the quantity of Nature's Grace procs that you're getting in a given pull. Hopefully that one makes sense. That's a little bit of a harder one to explain, and it'd be easier if I'm sitting there in a raid environment just going through it. I've mentioned it a bunch on stream and kind of explained it, but I figured a multi-pull trash mob out here in the open world would do it justice. So let's do it one more time. We'll walk through it here on this group over here, just to hopefully let's go ahead. We'll start with Toe Up here. We're going to go Starfire into Moonfire. Neither of those crit. Moonfire, that crit. So we can start on this guy here. While this is casting, I could cast over to this guy. Of course, we're going to get knocked back a ton. Moonfire here, right? So then that got a crit on that one. So then the next cast is going to be Starfire. And we're getting a bunch of knockback. But you get the idea from a PVE standpoint. Obviously, in a perfect world, we're not the ones tanking all the mobs that we're killing. But you get what I'm saying. You can basically keep casting. If you crit, your next cast is Starfire. If you don't crit, you tab over during that global cooldown and Moonfire the next target. Same thing. If you crit, Starfire, and then tab mid-cast, be ready to Moonfire the next target, and rinse and repeat, trying to bait out as many Nature's Grace procs as possible. I really hope that makes sense to you guys. These were the things that I thought were the biggest tips I could think of things that I try to implement regularly and are very noticeable DPS gains. You will see on these pulls, if you are actually able to utilize all of these in their full potency of what I'm talking about, with Moonfire not being an issue from a debuff slot perspective, and you have your on-use trinket, you will see on some of these pulls, you will start to pull ahead when it comes to the actual DPS, because it is a lot of raw damage that you can actually pump, irregardless of how good your gear is. So like always, guys, please let me know if you have any questions on this, and I will do my best to get to every comment. And like always, comment, rate, subscribe. Come hit us up in the live stream if you guys want to come and ask any questions or just hang out, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.